You mentioned before that had you taken that test, that Dor Yesharim test, you and your wife wouldn't be together. How do you understand that? Like if we're predestined for one another, how does that happen? Either you're soulmates or you're not soulmates. How would that have affected? And is taking a test something that stops soulmates from getting together? Like, how would you explain that?
You ask me my opinion?
Yeah, your thoughts on
Perhaps. My thoughts on it are that
it.
God runs the world and God gives us tools to help us get through our lives. And we use those tools within the parameters of Torah as we're supposed to. And we
Mhm,
live our lives. I will just tell you what I know for a fact because I was involved with Dor Yesharim for many years, that when they came to Crown Heights originally, Rabbi Marlowe, Olav Hashem, who was our rabbi at the time, took the entire folder with all the details about the research and about the testing and the rest, and sent it into the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe
mhm,
the question you just asked. And I can show you a transcript of the Rebbe's own handwriting, pardon me, where the Rebbe wrote, send it back to Rabbi Marlowe, and he wrote in Hebrew, Kilakol Shaila Refuis Umanishtana, question mark, exclamation point, Askar Alatzin. Which translates in English, the Rebbe didn't understand why the rabbi even asked him. It's a medical
mhm,
question and it should be dealt with by doctors, and it's no different than any other scenario. So the Rebbe took a clear position on this. I know that in other Hasidic groups, they worry about the point you just made and they delay the testing and then they have all kinds of trouble. But Dar Sharm has a
mhm,
policy, they don't test couples once they're engaged. And there are other
mhm,
communities who feel like they shouldn't test prior to being engaged. But the Rebbe made it very clear that from his perspective, it was a strictly medical question, which means do what doctors say. So if a couple is destined for one another because they're soulmates and they have medical issues. So for 5,000 years, those medical issues were not discoverable, so they would get married. Now they are. So the same God who wanted them to get married and unfortunately deal with challenging children has now arranged that you can know beforehand and make determinations that will prevent these kinds of things from happening. And
mhm,
the issue of a soulmate, which is an idea found in the Gemara, it's found in the Talmud, is coupled by the idea that we're supposed to be reasonable people and we're supposed to use our
mhm,
best judgment. And that's how
mhm,
decisions are made. You don't sit back, relax, and wait for God to act. That's not how He operates. We do
mhm,
everything, not something, everything in our power, and He leads us in the right direction. And any person who's honest about his life knows that God shows Himself in the areas of our life where we invested the most. In other words, when you work very hard in a particular area, using my profession as an example, God plays an enormous role in the things that you think you're using your decision power
mhm,
completely, and he steers the ship. That's how He operates. Hashem is in the shadows, but He's ever
mhm,
present in the shadows. So don't worry about Him. He's in charge. We're
mhm.
never going to medically exclude God from our life. It's never going to happen. He's on the ball. He's cool, and He's very passive, very quiet. The Gemara speaks about, the Talmud speaks about three sins a person commits every day. And they're not really sins, they're just omissions. And one of them is, in the language of the Talmud, is called iyun tefillah, which means to lack concentration during prayer. But there's a fascinating Rashi, that Rashi in the Gemara, in the Talmud and Tractate Brachas, translates iyun tefillah as a person who prays, and he waits and watches to see how God is going to answer his prayer. It's not the way
Mhm,
God operates. He waits for you to turn your
mhm,
back. You do what you
mhm,
have to do, but God's not playing, what's the right word? He's not playing. There's no deals with God. When you ask God for what you need, He'll give you what He thinks He should give you, and He gives you what you ask for. But you have to let it be. You have to have tamam tiyeh misham lekech. You have to be simple and sincere with God, and not calculated and reciprocal, because He doesn't operate that way. He
mhm.
doesn't
So
operate
there's
that way.
no making deals with God?
You are making deals with God, but it doesn't tabulate the way you would
Mhm,
do something on a calculator. People can do all kinds of things, but in
mhm,
the end, God's relationship with us is is from the perspective where we don't even see how we get what we ask for. We ask for
mhm,
something, and we feel frustrated that it's not coming. And then you look back 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and it all played out exactly. He
Right.
operates in his subliminal, he operates in the shadows. That's one of his tricks. And if we sit
Mhm.
around and expect it to be delivered in a certain way, it simply won't be.
Mhm. Right.